There we go. All right. This Zoom stuff out of the way. Perfect. All right. Welcome everyone to the Affordable Housing Week session, how housing cooperatives have empowered low-income communities and preserved permanently affordable housing. So, if you have spent any time in this industry of enabling low-income residents to have affordable rentals, you may know that stories like these are unfortunately more common than not. Rent hikes, displacement, just all sorts of struggles across the board. And our goal here with housing cooperatives is to change these stories to these stories. All of these articles are written about resident-owned communities or housing cooperatives that we at NWCDC have helped support in their conversion and purchase of their properties. So, today's presentation will be about ROC Northwest and how we preserve affordable housing. We'll talk about what a housing cooperative is, if this program actually works, and what a conversion looks like from a seller standpoint. Before we begin, I'm going to introduce myself. Victoria is here as well. She's off camera right now, but she might hop in to answer some questions. My name is Grayson Cooper. I am an acquisition specialist. I focus mostly on converting manufactured home parks into housing cooperatives, but we do the whole 9 yards with all sorts of multifamily assets. So, what are the goals of our program through ROC Northwest? We want to safeguard housing stability for low-income individuals. We want to permanently preserve, that's right, permanently preserve affordable housing. We want to teach the cooperative model and support community control, and we provide support, coaching, and assistance with ongoing cooperative businesses for 10 years or more. So let's talk about what a housing cooperative is. I saw a lot of ones in the chat, so I'm going to spend a lot of time here. So in essence, very basically, very generally, a housing cooperative is a democratically controlled organization where each unit, whether it's an apartment building or a condo style building or a manufactured home park, where each home would be one member or one vote in the ongoing business operations. So every single person that's living on a property there are the people who are running the business and controlling the business and property. So just to go through the bullet points here, the residents collectively own their property. The members buy a share to join. Now this has a couple asterisks by it, where I'd like to go a bit more into detail on the type of cooperatives that we help support and convert into. There are two big types of housing cooperatives, if you were to Google this to try to get some information ahead of time. There's market rate cooperatives and there's limited equity cooperatives. Excuse me. A market rate cooperative, it concerns the equity that you're putting in. So there's a membership fee when you're joining any sort of cooperative. And that membership fee when you join a market rate cooperative is set by the market, that equity that you have within it, set by the market. So if you are spending $10,000 to get into a cooperative 10 years ago, and then you want to leave the cooperative, you want to move out of your unit and someone else is moving in, that $10,000 increases based on what the market will pay. And that makes it very unaffordable for low-income housing to be preserved through this model. So it's not the model that we use, but it is a model that's out there. The other type, which we are, is the limited equity cooperative. And like the name kind of implies, we're not trying to increase equity over time. The market is not setting the cost that it takes to get into this cooperative. For our program, it's usually at a $100 joining fee to join or membership fee to join the cooperative, and it stays that amount. So the buy-in is always set through the rules and bylaws, and it's easy and affordable to join at any time, even down the road. So through the rest of these bullet points, decisions are made democratically. Each household or each unit is a member and they vote on all of the decisions. There's usually one vote per household. The monthly fees cover shared costs, so that's the lot fees or the rents. They pay for all the operating costs, the loan payments, etc. The focus is on long-term affordability. You're not going to raise rent on yourself if you're running a rental that is your own home. You're not going to raise the rent on yourself unless you absolutely have to. So it makes it very easy to focus on long-term affordability there. Obviously, it encourages cooperation. Each person is a part business owner in the operations going on in these cooperatives and shared responsibility. It protects against outside investors through ownership. The cooperative owns the property, and it builds community stability and control. So I've kind of alluded to some of these already, but what are the benefits of a housing cooperative? Lower housing costs, as I said before. If you are running a business where you set your own rent, you are not going to charge yourself more rent than you need to. You're going to cover your costs. You're going to have a little extra to set aside if needed. And that is about it. You're not going to try to gouge yourself for rent money. That wouldn't make much sense. Another benefit, community control. The residents have a direct say in the decision-making of their business. If they wanted to build a water park on their property, they absolutely could, though I wouldn't recommend it. A stronger sense of community. This is something that we see in all the cooperatives we work with. I was actually just at a park down in Puyallup a few weeks ago, and I was hearing residents trying to cut costs and say things like, oh, I will do the landscaping for free. Like, let me just bring out my mower on Saturdays and take care of everything and help save some costs so we can keep our rents down lower. This is a story we see in a lot of the communities that we support. Another benefit is stability. Again, you're not going to raise rents on yourself. It creates a very stable business as the costs are very predictable and affordable. And finally, collective decision-making. What about ultimate oversight? So there are a lot of cooperatives out there, and a lot fail because maybe members don't have the education or information that they need to run a business properly. Maybe they're bad actors trying to make the business more of an income stream rather than a cooperative actually doing what it should be doing and supporting the members within it. For all the communities that we support, there is an asset steward, which is us.
How are you? Good.
Hello. There's an asset steward, which is us. We have built-in rules to their articles of incorporation and often within their loan terms that make sure that they can't change the rules that would stray from what those cooperatives' goals are, which is to preserve that affordable housing. So proof of concept, obviously, this isn't a new thing. We've been doing this for a while, and we've supported the cooperative acquisition of over 30 manufactured home communities, which is over 1,500 households, which is awesome. And we continue to support these, as I said at the beginning. We do this for at least 10 years after conversion. We help support these multi-million-dollar businesses because often these residents have not run a multi-million-dollar business and they need support throughout that process. And we are there to do that. So I'm going to stop here for a second on this picture of a lovely housing cooperative over in Spokane and see if there are any questions. I do not know exactly how to check the chat while I'm sharing my screen, so I'm going to stop for a sec. Any questions so far on the basics of a cooperative before I get more into it here? Give it like 10 seconds. Not seeing anything. Awesome. Good so far. Let me start sharing my screen again and we can keep on going. Awesome. So let's get into more of what the process looks like for a cooperative acquisition or conversion through our program. So at first, when a property goes on sale, or maybe before it has, we are reviewing feasibility. So this is, I could do a whole webinar on exactly what that looks like, but essentially we're trying to find the fair market value of the property, see if it's affordable for the current residents based on their income, figure out financing, all that sort of stuff. Second, if we figure out that it is feasible at a certain price, we negotiate with the broker or the seller and create an assignable purchase and sale agreement, or in other words, the contract that we are going under to purchase the property. Number three, and this item is number three, but it's kind of throughout this entire process, is organizing the residents. Throughout our conversion process, we are helping create the cooperative. We are helping create bylaws, community rules, making sure everything's legal and filed with the state, and making sure that that business is set up for success before close and purchase has even happened. And after the beginning of organizing those residents, we are executing our inspections. So making sure that the property is what we expect it to be, nothing's broken, and if it is, that we know about it, title issues, all sorts of stuff like that. Fifth, we're going to bring in that permanent financing to help the residents afford the property, which I'll go into more specifics on that a little bit later. And finally, cooperative purchase. So first, let's get a bit more into feasibility. Like I said before, this is mostly trying to figure out what the fair market value is and if the residents can afford it. We don't want to approach residents and say, hey, this could become a housing cooperative and it's going to cost you $500 extra a month. That's not going to get you a great reception. So we want to make sure this is feasible before we start conversations with anyone, just to make sure there's not disappointment and that we are making fair offers on any properties that we're helping support convert. So again, purchase price, I've already kind of talked about this, but the answer is fair market value. And the long answer is making sure the residents can afford it, looking at the operating expenses, the infrastructure, if it's aging, if it needs to be fixed, all that sort of stuff. And that purchase price is negotiated by us at NWCDC. So next, that resident organizing step. So we have an initial resident meeting to inform the residents of their opportunity to purchase, what the costs would look like, and I will show you a bit more on what that looks like specifically in a bit on our case study here. But we talk about the draft budget, the financial impact, what a cooperative would look like for them, and kind of answer any questions. And at the end of that meeting, we have a vote, and we require a majority vote of over 50% to move forward and purchase. So next, assuming those residents voted yes, let's move forward, let's look into this, we do our due diligence and figure out our financing. So we're going to do those inspections I talked about earlier. We want to look at the physical site, all the utility systems, the big systems that might end up breaking and be expensive, roofs, streets, any single thing that's going to need to be repaired and maintained by the cooperative. We want to make sure we figure out those costs and when those things will need to be replaced. And we lead through that. We have a lot of people we work with that are very good at doing these inspections and understand the unique business of a cooperative. So we go through all that, we get our financing, and we close. But like I mentioned at the beginning, we are not creating these cooperatives and leaving them out to dry. We understand this is a complicated thing to run your own business, especially a business of such magnitude that's this large, multi-million dollars. So we continue to provide support for a minimum of 10 years. And a great question that I think people always ask when we talk about this is, where does this money come from? So we're bringing money from lots of different sources. Rock Capital is the most common source. That's a bank we work with, but we work with lots of CDFIs, cities, counties, and have lots of grant funding that we bring in to make this affordable for all the residents. Subsidy, as I just mentioned, very, very important to the financing of these deals, which we'll see an example of one in our case study in a second here. But it is very important to make sure that the rent raise that's required to afford the loan payments on top of the operating expenses is affordable for the residents, and we are not creating an impossible situation here. So before I get into the case study here, which was our most recent conversion, Ohana Estates, which you might remember this from the beginning when I showed all of the news articles, I will check one more time to see if we have any questions here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen one more time and look at the chat here. Yes, so I see Mitchell said, I know they're really frequently used in New York, but I don't know anyone who lives in one in here in Washington. Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we have over 30 right now. They're all manufactured home parks, but we're working on multifamily as well. They're becoming a lot more common here. Does not look like there's any more questions, but I'll give it a second. And so there's some people in the waiting room here too. If there are any more questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. I will look again in a few minutes here. Doesn't look like this. Awesome. So we'll pull up my screen share again here. Awesome. So next we're going to get into our case study, which is Ohana Estates. This is a manufactured home park down in Tacoma, Washington. And the story here, we've worked with these owners before. They've sold other properties to us, or to the residents, I should say. And they were working with this community. And as you may see, this beautiful line of 59 sequoias here on the edge of the park. The owners are old and they're thinking maintaining these trees and making sure the roots are cut back has just been too much of a headache. We're just going to cut them. We're going to get rid of them. And the community said, no, this is our home. This is a very large part of why we love our home is this giant group of sequoias. And they kind of pushed back a little bit. And the owner said, well, we've tried this rock idea out before. What if we explore that again? And from there is where we start our story here. So for manufactured home parks in the state of Washington, there is statute called the Notice of Opportunity to Compete, which basically means anytime one of these park owners wants to explore selling, they have to notice every single person in the park that they're looking into selling. And this is the top of that, what that notice looks like. They also have to notice the Department of Commerce, which in turns notices any eligible organizations, usually cities or townships. And we are also one of those eligible organizations as a nonprofit that can help purchase on behalf of the tenants. So we also get these notices. So you may remember when we were talking about what the process looks like, that feasibility part of the process, this is where that starts often. We see this come in, we reach out to sellers, and we start looking into finances and all that to see if it's feasible for cooperative acquisition and conversion. So this is what that looked like for Ohana Estates late last year. Next, after we determine if it's feasible, we meet with the residents. And this is kind of a simplified, friendly language version of what the finances looked like for that park. So the operating expenses compared to the loan payment was actually pretty low. It was about $6,000. That monthly loan payment on top of that was almost $12,000. So we needed to raise the rent, the lot fee in this park to offset and be able to cover those costs. And to do that, we had to raise the rent. Initially, this was our proposal, our draft budget, to pay for that 2.7. We needed to raise the rent to $756 per month. And I believe at the time it was $656. So this was not a small increase. This was a $100 increase. That's nothing to scoff at. But still, they did vote to move forward. It was important to them to control their home and have this ongoing affordable rent after that increase, of course. So we were able to cover that with the 756 here, that 18K and change with this income, and have a little bit of surplus too, which is important in case unexpected expenses come up. So this is what we showed them. They voted to move forward. And next, we sign and send our letter of intent to the seller. So this is what that looks like. And I wanted to highlight, this is a lot of information here. I'm not going to go through everything, but I wanted to highlight some things that you would see on the seller side of things if you were ever a seller selling to your community. So one thing is our timeline here. So our timeline is near market. I'd say it probably takes a little bit longer than market. And the big reason for that is that every step of the way, we are meeting with the residents and getting approval, and they're making sure that this is right for them. But second, there's also this big benefit down here, which anytime you sell to a housing cooperative in the state of Washington, you're exempt from real estate excise tax. In this case, was just over 50K. So this is what the finances looked like in more of a pro forma form, and this was our capital stack here. So that, again, you may remember the loan payment. It was actually a little bit higher than this in that initial draft budget that I sent. This was our final budget. And the reason this number came down is because we were graciously and generously given some money from the Pierce County CDC, and they were able to bring that lot fee increase of $100 down to, I believe, 65. It says on the next slide. I'll confirm that in a second. But again, I mentioned earlier, the subsidy is really important to make sure that this initial purchase price is affordable for the residents. You may also notice that purchase price was $2.7 million. We're at about almost $3.3 million. The biggest reason for that is, again, the residents are not putting a lot of equity into these purchases. They don't have a lot of income to just throw at this. We don't want to ask them for $10,000 to start these cooperatives off. Again, it's only $100. So it costs money to just purchase anything. You got to pay attorneys, inspectors, all that sort of stuff. And secondly, and I think the bigger bucket where most of this money is going is replacement reserves. We want to make sure we're setting up these cooperatives for success. The biggest reserve that we have is our replacement reserve. That's the reserve we use for repairs within the next 10 years and beyond, making sure they're set up for that, as well as two other reserves for their working capital and operating expenses, as well as their loan payments. We want to make sure they have money set aside in case of any sort of emergency so that they succeed. Which, by the way, we've never had a ROC fail so far. So the end result here, as I mentioned before, that lot fee was not a $100 increase. It was a $65 increase thanks to Pierce County, up to $721 per month. They formed their housing cooperative. They purchased the property. And 180K, again, remember I mentioned we had those reserve accounts, 180K was allocated to repair fire-prone electrical systems that they had at no extra cost to the residents. In fact, that lot fee came down. We didn't know when we started with that draft budget that there was going to be almost $200,000 of repairs to make sure there were no more fires on this property. But that was something that we figured out through inspections and made sure to cover. The sequoia trees that they were so lovingly trying to protect were preserved, and money was set aside for maintenance. And now 25 units of housing in Tacoma are permanently preserved as community-owned, low-cost housing for seniors. And here's a picture from their ribbon cutting ceremony they had right after purchasing it. Great group, great community. They were all very happy. And here's one quote from one of our other conversions in Tacoma, Olga Dorr, that I just really love. our top priority was keeping housing affordable for the people here. Without this
Sorry.
opportunity, oh, sorry, I'd heard someone there. Without this opportunity, many residents couldn't afford another rent increase. Cooperative ownership lets us manage our community, setting our own rules, overseeing the budget, and securing a stable future. Thank you very much. Here is our contact information. I'll let you look at that for a second here before I stop sharing my screen and we can answer questions about anything I've talked about today. Going once, going twice. We got through this a little bit faster than I thought I would, so we got lots of time for questions if anyone has any. Let me check. There's someone in the chat here. Looks like Victoria's answering some of them. Yes, so Alex asked for a limited equity co-op. Are there limitations on how the project can sell in the future? Could the co-op members decide as a unit that they would convert out of a co-op and convert to market rate? And how are the restrictions put into place to prevent this from happening? So I did mention this a little bit when I talked about the fact that there's an asset steward. There's someone who's kind of there to make sure that the co-op is succeeding and doing what it is meant to do. Technically, they could explore this, but more often than not, if someone is not interested in the co-op idea, they're just going to move out of the co-op, right? If it's not right for them, they are just going to move away. But again, we are there as an asset steward to make sure that there are preventions from them doing things they shouldn't be doing. We're not trying to set up an income stream for these residents. We don't want to give them all this grant funding and have them turn around and sell it and make millions of dollars. So we have that built into their articles of incorporation, as well as often into their loan terms to make sure that that's not something that they're able to do. Great question. Co-ops often have extensive interview processes as a part of tenant or owner selection. Are there equity concerns with this process? Is that compatible with the Seattle law about accepting the first eligible applicant for rental housing? So I will admit that I'm more on the conversion side. I don't often help with the ongoing supporting. But what I believe is how it works is it's honestly pretty similar to just moving into any sort of community. The difference is you're also becoming a member of the co-op. So you have to know that going in and accept that going in. So there's not really any extra interview process outside of accepting being a member of the co-op. You're just moving into a home and knowing that it is a housing co-op.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there, Grayson. That's exactly correct. A housing cooperative is a housing provider, and so they have to adhere to all of the same standards as fair housing laws do, both the federal and the state protections. So those come into play. That's why it's really important that the housing cooperative has a professional property management company, because they rely on that professional property management company to ensure adherence to all of the state and local and federal laws when it comes to providing housing. But to Grayson's point, the whole long interview process that you might have seen in New York City and different I mean, I think Liz Lemon actually goes through one on 30 Rock, right? That's not necessarily the thing that happens in limited equity cooperatives. That's more of a market rate cooperative process. In a limited equity cooperative, it really is for it more mirrors the experience of rental housing.
Yep. And it looks like we got another question here. That's awesome. In the case study, did the entirety of the resident's rent represent that loan payment for the debt, or did that include the funding of reserves or the reserves funded through the PCCDC? So mostly the reserves are funded at acquisition through that acquisition financing. So you may remember that slide that I was going through. They had a $2.7 million purchase price, but we had almost $3.3 million in funding that was needed. The reason for that is we are upfront funding these reserves to make sure that they have them and they don't have to cough up more money. That's all built into our feasibility process. We know that that's coming right at the beginning. Though I will say they often are contributing smaller payments throughout their ongoing operations as well. But yes, that their rent payment covers all that. Their operating expenses, their loan payment, everything. Yeah.
And Chris, just for clarification, when they're doing the acquisition, all of the financing, all of the capital stack is coming together, and it's really being mixed into a pot of funding. We currently have not experienced where one specific lender funds a specific cost at acquisition. So it's not, we don't track the dollars in that way.
Yep. Looks like we got one more question here. As others mentioned, it seems co-ops have been less prevalent in Washington. Are there barriers here preventing more? Is financing options part of the barrier? How are they typically financed elsewhere? And are there limited options?
I will take
So,
this one,
oh, yeah,
Grayson.
yeah, you got it. Take it.
Okay, so there are barriers to multifamily cooperatives in Washington right now. We have 33 manufactured housing community cooperatives, and we have 33 manufactured housing cooperatives for very specific reasons. Those reasons are that um, funding for acquisition predated our dramatic success in making this possible. As Grayson has talked about, that acquisition funding and that subsidy that's needed at the time of purchase is critical to making those deals pencil. So NWCDC has been awarded capital funding in the capital budget uh, almost every year since 2020, and we use that money to move forward and to help these residents acquire their manufactured housing communities. That funding, that rapid funding is not necessarily available in Washington state right now. It's not available at the local level and it's not available at the state level. We are actively working with our policymakers to advocate for that funding to be available. We're working with municipalities to look at some of their financial resources and see how they can be shifted and use more for conversions like this. But it really does come down to funding. There are a few other policy pieces that we're also working with state lawmakers to edit and make changes to state statute that allow for cooperative acquisition in a more timely way, or not timely, in a more less expensive way, honestly. But really, it really just does come down to financing and that acquisition financing. And as Grayson pointed out, that acquisition financing is about 30% of the total capital stack. And so when you put it out there, what's the price per unit? We're talking relatively a small price per unit, typically like 30 to $60,000 per unit of housing to preserve it in perpetuity. And that's a one-time single investment that cities and counties in the state can make to ensure that that unit of housing remains permanently affordable.
Thank you for that. So do we have any more questions here? Going once, going twice. Alrighty. Well, I really appreciate everyone coming and hearing us talk about this. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. I'll put my email one more time in the chat. Email anytime, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.